Before I start, I also have an apology to the interpreters. I did provide some talking points, but I'm going to change them a bit. Honourable judges, members of the Permanent People's Tribunal, Afghan defenders and friends, I'm truly honoured to be here in The Hague today to stand side by side with Afghan women, human rights defenders, and their allies to hear this ruling of the Permanent People's Tribunal for Women of Afghanistan. What a truly historic occasion. The tribunal's finding that the Taliban has committed and continues to commit crimes against humanity, including persecution on the grounds of gender and other inhumane acts, marks an important moment of moral clarity for the people of Afghanistan and for all who stand against systematic gender discrimination, oppression, and injustice. While the tribunal's ruling doesn't carry the binding legal authority of an international court, it nevertheless represents a powerful vindication for victims and survivors who continue to live under this extreme and authoritarian regime. It's a confirmation that the world sees what they have endured and are enduring, that their evidence is believed, and that the responsibility for these crimes lies squarely with the victims, with the perpetrators, not with the victims. Moreover, the findings and recommendations that we have just heard in the last few minutes are powerful, direct, and concrete, and they must be taken seriously by all those to which they were specifically directed. The ruling highlights and affirms what women and girls in Afghanistan have long known. They are living under the yoke of a deliberate, institutionalized system of gender discrimination, oppression, and domination that affects almost every aspect of their lives. Under Taliban rule, Afghan women and girls are denied their most basic human rights to education, to work, to freedom of movement, to health and bodily autonomy, to freedom of expression and assembly, and participation in public life. The tribunal's determination that the Taliban's policies and their implementation constitute inhuman acts and persecution on grounds of gender is a crucial recognition of the scale and intention behind this oppression. Women and girls bear the brunt of this draconian system. However, Afghans of all genders are affected. In their ruling, the judges also found that the situation in Afghanistan meets the constitutive elements of an apartheid-like system, an institutionalized regime of segregation, exclusion, and domination. At the same time, they acknowledge that because the discrimination is grounded in gender rather than race, it falls outside the codified definition of apartheid in international law, which has yet to formally recognize gender apartheid as a distinct crime. I welcome their call to the United Nations and its member states to declare solidarity with the voices and struggles of Afghan women, including by calling for strengthening of the global accountability framework through codification of gender apartheid as a crime against humanity in international law. Central to this judgment were the courageous testimonies of survivors and witnesses, which I was both privileged and humbled to hear delivered to the tribunal in Madrid. The dignity, bravery, and strength of the witnesses showed, often at great personal risk, in accounting their deeply personal experiences of persecution, discrimination, and violence, that underscores the indispensable role of survivors' voices in the pursuit of justice. And I must say, just as a personal reflection, that what I heard from the witnesses in Madrid, I hear daily in my role as Special Rapporteur. It was important that those voices were made publicly, but I have personal knowledge of many of those stories, and I'm so glad that that has now reached the public. Directly from them, who were standing for thousands of other women and girls. Too often, in international processes, the people most affected are relegated to the margins, and this should never be the case. Placing Afghan voices at the center of proceedings such as these is not only a moral imperative, it should also serve as a model for future efforts to improve the human rights situation in Afghanistan and ensure accountability for past and ongoing crimes. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the Afghan lawyers, experts, the inspired requesting organizations, other civil society leaders, and survivors who led the process, shaped the evidence, and exposed the nature of the Taliban's crimes. To them I say, your tenacity and unwavering commitment to justice, human rights, and dignity are an inspiration, and yet another example of the strength, resilience, and bravery of the people of Afghanistan. It shows how Afghan-initiated actions supported by the international community can have impact. Thank you. Huge thanks are also due to the Permanent People's Tribunal and its staff for accepting this important case and providing the structure and platform for this hearing. And I also want to thank the judges so much for your commitment, time, and efforts. I just referred to the requesting organizations as being inspired. I must say that some of you, and I say this in a positive sense, look a bit tired. And I think you look a bit tired because you've worked so hard night and day in recent weeks to deliver today's decision. Thank you too. To members of the international community, you've already received plenty of recommendations from the judges, but I just want to comment on this a little bit more. If you choose to look away now, you do so in the face of compelling evidence that crimes against humanity have been and continue to be committed against the people, and especially the women and girls of Afghanistan. those who seek to normalize or legitimize the Taliban sends a clear message. It emboldens them. Attempts to confer legitimacy on a criminal regime will not foster stability, but rather will entrench discrimination and perpetuate the cycles of violence that Afghans have endured for decades. Choosing this path would constitute not only a profound moral failure, it would have lasting practical consequences. Of course, while this ruling is welcomed, we must also confront the reality that much work lies ahead if we're to challenge and dismantle the Taliban's institutionalized system of gender discrimination, oppression, and domination. Yet, while the path is long, it's not without direction. There are a range of actions and interventions needed, which, when combined, offer the potential for the emergence of a stable and inclusive Afghanistan. Now, I had a list of things here that Judge Harris has pretty much outlined in her conclusions. The range of accountability measures that have been established but must intensify, pursuing both individual criminal and state responsibility. I'm not going to go into too much detail of these, but I do urge support for initiatives under the CEDAW Convention that have already been discussed, and I call upon, in this regard, Muslim majority countries to express support for that initiative. And as has been said by the judges, we need to strengthen the international normative framework by codifying gender apartheid, and that women, since the 90s, Afghan women have used this term to describe their lived experiences. But I would say that there is no need to wait for codification. It's time now to support Afghan women's rejection of the repression they are suffering by publicly and loudly naming it. And there needs to be ongoing support for Afghan civil society, particularly women-led organizations. Supporting them is not an act of charity. It's a strategic investment in Afghanistan's future. There needs to be full funding of the humanitarian response in Afghanistan, but with the necessary guardrails to ensure that the aid reaches the intended participants. Fifth, the international community must uphold its obligations towards Afghan refugees and those seeking protection, as was also mentioned by the judges, including by refraining from returning Afghans to a country where they are liable to suffer persecution and to live in poverty. States should provide safe pathways, fair asylum procedures, and adequate long-term support for Afghans who fled targeted violence and persecution, especially women and girls, LGBTQ persons, human rights defenders, journalists, members of the former government and its security forces, and marginalized and minority ethnic and religious communities. Finally, the people of Afghanistan, in particular women and girls in all their diversity, must be included in all decision-making processes concerning the country's future. Excluding them would not only replicate the injustices highlighted by the tribunal, but also guarantee the failure of any political process aimed at achieving a safe, stable, inclusive, and rights-respecting Afghanistan. The above steps, also mentioned by the Tribunal, will be a start and will create momentum, but they're not sufficient. We must continue to explore all avenues in our effort to ensure the rights and dignity of the people of Afghanistan. Today's ruling is a very important step, and congratulations to all involved, but it's only a step. Justice for Afghan people will require persistence, solidarity, and unwavering commitment, and there must be further opportunities created where survivors and witnesses, women, girls, men, boys, and gender-diverse persons, where they have the opportunity to testify, to tell their stories, and have their voices heard. Let this moment strengthen our resolve to stand with the people of Afghanistan and to spur renewed and effective global action towards a future grounded in accountability, equality, and human dignity. I thank you.